Open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 39 tonight. Genesis chapter 39. It's amazing to me how we can find ourselves so confused, so discontent, so troubled, so worried, so sad, so burdened by life. You know, and it just happens so easily, doesn't it? I mean, I think that in our lives we go through stages and times where just everything seems lost, everything seems hopeless, you know, nothing seems to come together, and we just feel like, you know, life is not worth even living at times. And I think it's interesting because you have that perspective, and you have people who kind of live in that place of just failure and defeat and trial all the time. But then you have these rare jewels, these people who just have a different outlook. They have a different set of wires that wire their life and their experience into something. You know, it doesn't matter how bad it is or how horrible things get. They say, well, hey, you know, we can go from here. You know, it's, you know, things are going to be good, you know, and everything's wonderful. And yet I think that there is a key to this in the Christian life when it comes to understanding what life is about and all of that is very important for us as Christians to understand, and that is that Jesus is life. And when we try to find hope in the future, you know, and all this next thing's going to happen, or, you know, I'm going to get married, or I'm going to have a house, or things are going to be better, and when we put our hope in that, it ends up being so fleeting, so disappointing. And honestly, the best thing that we could ever get in life, or the worst thing rather that we could ever get in life, is to get what we want. You know, because we have put this anticipation and this hope in what we want in life. And if you've ever gotten what you want, you realize that it never was quite cracked up to be what you thought it was going to be, right? And you see that. You know, you see people all the time languishing in life, failing in life, and miserable as all get out. And then, you know, and then you turn the channel from Access Hollywood to another channel, and you see people suffering somewhere else too. Because honestly, it doesn't matter how popular you become, or how rich you become, or how many kids you have, or how many houses you own. None of that satisfies. None of it makes you happy. And the true meaning of life and the key to contentment in life is simply one thing, and that is a relationship with Jesus. And you can have the most adverse circumstances in your life and things going completely sideways, and if you're clinging to Jesus, if He is your possession, if you will, if He's the one thing that you possess, you'll never feel like you lack anything. And that's the beautiful thing. And yet so few people find that reality. You know, we just want to cling to the idea that something else is going to satisfy us. Something else is going to make me feel fulfilled. Something else is going to be meaningful. And really, when it comes right down to it, Jesus is the only thing. The only thing that can make us satisfied. And he who has Jesus, as Tozer said, has all things in one. He has everything in one thing. And it's only through Jesus, I found in my life, that I can enjoy anything that I have. You know, when it comes to my wife, my kids, my house, anything that I own, any relationship that I enjoy, all those things can only be enjoyed through the filter of Jesus. Outside of Jesus, everything, all relationships become a burden. All hopes and dreams, whether met or anticipated, become a burden. And we're going to see that as we look at the story of Joseph. And of course, one of the most amazing stories in the Bible. And as you recall, Joseph's life started out very privileged, very good. He was born into his father's house as the favored son. And just a little guy, but his dad, because he was the son of his old age, kind of favored Joseph. I understand that a little bit. I have a 3-year-old in my house right now. and we call him Pookie, and he is spoiled rotten. You know, we lavish love upon the little turkey butt. I mean, he is horrible. And yet we're more patient with him than we have been with the other kids. We're more, it's like the son of my old age, right? And he's probably making me older, but you just love the kid. He's so cute. I love all my kids, but he just gets spoiled. But that's how Joseph was growing up in his father's house, and his father gave him, of course, a coat of many colors, and there's debates as to what that means. Was it a coat that had no seams in it? Was it a coat that had long sleeves? But whatever the case was, is it showed that his father was favoring him, and he was his favorite child. Never a good recipe for a happy home when you favor one child over another. And of course, Joseph, seeing his brothers, the daughters of Zilpah, the sons of Zilpah and Bilhah out in the field messing around, he came and gave his father an evil report, and they kind of despised him for that. And if that wasn't enough, if that being despised wasn't enough, it moved on to worse things when Joseph would have this dream where he dreamed that there was 12 sheaves in the field, and all his brothers with their sheaf, and his sheaf rose up in the middle amongst all of them, and all the other sheaves bowed down to his sheaf. And his brothers despised him even more, saying, "Shall we bow down to you?" Of course, they're all older than him, and here's this young punk. And then he had yet another dream. And in that dream, he saw the 11 stars and the sun and the moon, and they were all there, and then they bowed down to him. And his father, he told it to his father, and his father rebuked him, saying, "Shall your mother and I and your 11 brothers bow down to you?" But his father considered the thing, kept it in his mind. Well, it wasn't long after that, Joseph, being 17, probably 17 or 18 years old, was sent out to the field to go and check on his brothers because they had been gone maybe too long. They went to Shechem, that place where they had committed the atrocity, and they'd killed the men of Shechem by treachery. And of course, Jacob, leaving that place thinking, we're going to be a stink in the nostrils of the people who live here, so we need to get out of this place before they catch us. And then, of course, sending his son there to check on the brothers who were all there in Shechem, and he gets there and he doesn't find them, and he's wandering around in the field. And of course, you remember that a man of the country just wandering out sees him wandering in the field and comes to him and says, "What do you seek? What are you doing?" And Joseph says, "I seek my brothers." And the man happened to know, "Oh yeah, I heard them talking. They said they were going over to Dothan." And so Joseph, making the long trip over to Dothan, way out of range, way out of trajectory as to where he was planning on going. Now he's going over to Dothan, and he finds his brothers there. But when his brothers see him, they said, "Hey, let's do something with this dreamer. Let's kill him and tell his father that the wild beasts have got him." And so they had murderous hearts, and they grabbed Joseph. And of course, it was Judah who said, no, don't kill him. Let's just throw him in this pit for now, and then we'll sell him. And as the Midianites came, they sold him off to the Midianites to be taken down to Egypt to the slave market. His brothers then taking the coat of many colors that his father had given him and killing a goat and putting the blood on it and then taking it to their father Jacob and just letting Jacob's mind run wild as to what probably happened. "Oh no, a wild beast has killed my son." And nobody could comfort him. He was so grieved. He says, my gray hairs are going to bring me down to the grave in sorrow. He can't be comforted. Well, then we saw a little bit of a detour in chapter 38, which was a little bit bizarre, as Judah, probably thinking about what he'd done to his brother, worried that he's going to be discovered, takes probably a 20-plus year detour from his father's house, and he goes to an Adulamite, a friend of his, Hira, the Adulamite's house, and hangs out with him and finds a woman of the country and falls in love with this Canaanite woman, has children by her, Onan, and Shelah. Got to wonder about Shelah. Anyway, he has these 3 boys, and he finds a woman, Tamar, to be the wife of his oldest son, as he comes of age. He marries them together, and then, of course, God saw that was wicked, and he killed him. And so he gives his wife, wife Tamar, to his brother Onan, and his brother Onan wouldn't perform the duties of the younger brother, which was to bear offspring for his older brother, and so God killed him. And so then he says, why don't you go and live with your father's house? And when Sheila's of age, the little tyke, grows up and he's old enough to be a husband, we'll call for you, we'll marry you to him, and he can perform the duties. And of course, Judah had no intention of giving this black widow his third son. And so he leaves her off at her father's house, and she saw that he was not going to give her to him, or him to her, or whatever the case, her to him. And so she plays the harlot. If you remember, she stood by the roadside and waited for Judah to come by, and she took from him what he owed her, and that was a son. And he lied with her, and she took his signet ring and his staff, and being promised a kid of the goats, and he went to give the goat, and she was gone, couldn't be found. Until a few months later, she was found, pregnant, remember. And as she's there pregnant, he says, bring her out and let her be burned. And she says, okay, fine, but the man who owns this signet ring and this staff, this is who I'm pregnant by. And he said at that point, she is more righteous than I. So, just this crazy scenario, kids being, brothers being sold off into slavery, back to the story from this parenthetical story, back to the life of Joseph. And so in verse 1 of chapter 39, it says, now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, the officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. So this man, captain of the guard, some believe this means that he is the chief executioner. He was the guy who brought capital punishment upon any of the criminals in the land. He would cut their heads off or have them killed. And so here's this man who... he's down at the slave market, the auction, and he sees this young, strapping boy, and he purchases him. Joseph goes from being the favored in his father's house to now the bottom of the barrel of the slaves in Potiphar's house. And that's where he starts out. And it says, the Lord, and this is key, the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And I think that's so important to see there in that verse right there, that the Lord was with Joseph. Now, I think it's important to note, the Lord is with Joseph, but it's also very apparent as we go through the story and as we look at Joseph's life, that Joseph also was with the Lord. And I think that is the key to Joseph's success as you look at his prosperity, if you will, as a slave in Potiphar's house. The Lord was with him. It wasn't because Joseph was excellent in his craft or he was, super stylish or anything like that. What made him successful was that the Lord was with him. Now, this is something that's important for us to know, because what did Jesus say to us? He said, lo, I will be with you even to the end of the age. That's what Jesus promises us. And so think about that in terms of your own life. The Lord is with me, right? He hasn't left me or forsaken me. Have you ever felt that way? Like God has left me or forsaken me? Like, man, I have blown it. You know what? There's no way God could forgive me of what I just did or what I just thought or what I just went through or how I've been in life. That's a common thing that we feel, because when we think about Jesus' forgiveness of us, we instead of tagging that on him, we tag it on ourselves, don't we? Say, oh, Jesus forgives me because I've been a good Bible student, or Jesus forgives me, Jesus loves me because I've been a good wife, or I've been a good husband, or I've done everything I'm supposed to do, and I read my Bible every day, and I do devotions, and I pray 3 times a day, and I fast, and we tend to put it upon ourselves, don't we? And yet, why are we accepted in the beloved? Is it because we died for our sins, or because we were good, or because we read our Bibles? No, we're accepted by faith in Jesus. Not because we're putting our trust in ourselves and the things that we've done, but because we put our trust completely in him, alone, and nothing I've done. And that changes the whole perspective of the way God looks at me and the things that I believe about myself and the things I believe about my life. Am I really a failure? No, if he is for us, who can be against us? If he did not spare his son, but delivered him up for us all, how will he not in him freely give us all good things, it tells us in Romans chapter 8. I mean, what an amazing God that we serve, that he would take a worthless person, a person who is a sinner, a person who messed up, the person who has failed, and the sins that I commit on a daily basis, and yet when I turn my gaze to him and say, Jesus, you did it all. By faith I can stand against the enemy. By faith I can believe the truth that Jesus is my righteousness, that Jesus has made me to succeed, and he is with me even to the end of the age. Well, I don't feel that. Sometimes I just feel like I'm such a failure, and I feel like God's punishing me. We can live in that area if you want to. I mean, you can live in that lowland of thinking it's all about you. Or you can live in that place where you can believe, hey, I'm more than a conqueror through him who loved me, and I need to put my focus on him, put my focus on things above and not on things of this earth, where Christ is seated. And you will find, and this is true for every Christian, you will find that no matter what is going on in your present circumstance, you just lost your job, your car's breaking down, your dog is biting you at home, all these things are going bad, and you will find that you will have a joy and a love from God that is in your heart and a peace that passes understanding, and you'll go through life clinging to Jesus. I mean, how do you think Joseph felt? Being thrown into a pit, being sold, stripped naked, and sold to these Midianites who probably did not treat him well. I doubt he got a luxury seat on the back of the camel on the way down to Egypt. He was probably tied by the hands, given meager rations, and drugged down there. Now, they might have treated him okay because he was going to be sold as a slave, and you got to get the most out of your merchandise, right? I don't know. But I'm sure he wasn't too happy with the arrangement, whatever it was. And how easy would it be for you and for me if that were to happen to us, if everybody you loved sold you off and said, you're no longer part of our family, you're going to be a slave somewhere else, we want you out of our lives. And now you're on your way to a foreign place where you don't even speak the language and everybody's going to treat you poorly because you're just merchandise. How would you feel about God at that point? And yet we can't forget that it says in Psalm 105 that God sent a man because he had called for a famine in the land. God sent a man. Well, if that's the way God sends people, I don't want to go. I don't want God to send me, right? And yeah, I love that. Say, I'd rather be a doorkeeper in my Father's house than to be wealthy somewhere else or to have something, extravagant riches. I'd rather spend a day in the courts of the Lord than 1,000 days elsewhere. I love that old song by Wayne Watson. I'd rather be in the valley with Jesus than to dance on the mountain alone, right? I'd rather go through the valley of the shadow with him than to be on top. A day with Jesus, a moment with Jesus in the most adverse circumstance, it is far superior than that in the most luxurious accommodations, the most luxurious palace. And no doubt Joseph has experienced that because the Lord was with Joseph, verse 2. And he was a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. A slave, a successful slave. He was a free, favored son before. Now he's been demoted to a successful slave. And his master, verse 3, saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. Beautiful to see it when your life is going along and you're just following the Lord and you're just trying to do what the Lord's told you to do and you're clinging to him, and those people who are around you observing your life say, man, you're blessed. I want to hang out with you because you're the one who God seems to be blessing their life. Remember Laban even said that of Jacob. He said, I've learned through divination, through enchantments, that I am blessed for your sake. Interesting. Even the devil is telling Laban, yeah, well, you're blessed because the Lord's with your son-in-law. Pretty amazing. When your enemies or those who have mistreated you or those who have purchased you now find that you're the reason that they have favor. And so Joseph, it says, verse 4, so Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had was put under his authority. Now, this just shows, you could think about it. I mean, put yourself in that position. Just think of yourself being that guy who was taken, who was ripped apart from his family, and thrown into a slave position. Are you going to be that guy? Hey, I better put my hand to it. I'm going to serve the Lord in this position. No, I think probably, Joseph's one of those rare guys who just says, hey, you know what? God has to be with me. I remember that dream he gave me. He's going to have it come true someday. So I'm just going to be happy with wherever I'm at. How easy would it have been for Joseph to be like, this is stupid. God obviously has forsaken me. I don't give a rip. I'm just going to live for myself. No, it doesn't show that. It shows that he was seeking the Lord. It shows that his heart was towards the Lord and that the Lord was blessing him. And so blessed was he that Potiphar didn't even pay attention to his own possessions. He just put everything under Joseph's authority. He says, hey, I trust you with my life. I trust you with my wife. I trust you with my possessions, all my riches. I'm going to give you the checkbook. I've seen that God has blessed me because you're here. And I'm going to just give you free reign of this house. I'm putting you in charge of everything. Pretty amazing. Verse 5, so it was from the time that he had made him overseer of his house and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. Now this is an interesting phrase. So we see Joseph being completely blessed. You see Joseph being completely put in charge of everything, because as he's put in charge of more, Potiphar's blessed more. And so he's like, I don't even have to look at my stuff. I believe Joseph's going to take care of everything. I'm just going to eat my bread and only concern myself with that. And as my house just grows and prospers under the care of this young man. But there was a problem, and there's a price with this. Joseph was a beautiful boy. He was very handsome. In fact, this strong of language is only used of one other person. Can you guess who that is? One other person in the book of Genesis is described this exact way. Super beautiful. You know who it was? Rachel. Rachel. When he saw Rachel, Joseph's mom. So now we know where he gets his good looks, right? He gets it from his mama. And Jacob saw Rachel, and he loved her, and he kissed her, and he worked 7 years for her. That's how beautiful she was. Then he worked another 7 years because he got, hoodwinked with Leah. But here we see this young man. He's just as beautiful as his mama was, I always worried about my son, looking at pictures of me when I was a kid, looking in the mirror now. I'm thinking, man, hope he takes after his mama. What's weird is he looks like me, but he has all of her nice features. And so he's a beautiful young man. The same thing here. He is a good-looking young man, handsome in form and appearance. And so it uses this exact same thing to describe his mom, not in the masculine, but in the feminine. Verse 7, and it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, lie with me. Now think about this. Here's, he's a wealthy high-end man with probably a trophy wife. And from what we know from history and what the historians say, this was a common problem. It was really the first episode of Desperate Housewives. And that's what the whole Egyptian thing was about. A lot of women who were serial adulteresses in Egypt. It was a common thing that these women would look for young, strapping men. Now, you got to remember that she's probably, we're assuming she's a beautiful woman. And Joseph is at the prime, the peak of his sexual desire, which would be about 17, 18 years old. That's when the most hormones are happening in a young man. That's when he is, overwhelmed with problems of lust and temptation and all these things. And can you imagine being away from home, being in a foreign land, being in a strange house? He's probably not real keen with the language. And here's this beautiful woman saying, come into my bed. How do you think Joseph felt about that? Pretty interesting temptation. It says, verse 8, but he refused and said to his master's wife, look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all things he has into my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you. Because, I love this rebuke, you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? So here's a woman, and we don't know anything about this woman, what her vibe is or why she's this way. She's just one of those loose women who, just look for the next prey. We don't know what her vibe is, but it's very possible. Here's a woman who's just kind of being left by her husband. He's a busy man. He has a lot going on, and here she is, just left at home alone with nothing to do. She shopped all she can. She's watched as much TV as she can bear, and now she has to, find satisfaction somewhere else. And so she's made herself up, and she's decked herself out, and she's going after this young boy just to consume it upon her lusts. He says, there's no one in this house is greater than me. No one in this house who has been entrusted with more than I've been entrusted with. How could I do this to your husband? He hasn't kept anything back from me except for you. I can enjoy anything in this house except for you, because you are his wife. You are his wife. And this is long before Jesus would say, therefore what God has joined together, let no man separate. This is way before the writer of Hebrews would write, marriage is honorable among all, but adulterers and adulteresses God will judge. This is way before any of those admonitions or exhortations, and no doubt Joseph, growing up in his father's house, learned, hey, this isn't something we do. He's watched his brothers do detestable things. He's watched his sister get raped. He's seen these things happen in the world, and no doubt his dad is saying, this isn't the way that we behave ourselves. Marriage is sacred. Marriage is important. Marriage vows are to be cherished and to be honored. And yet here she is, she's ready to just throw it away in a whim. Why is she ready to throw it away at a whim? Well, it's obvious. It's not because Joseph is extra studly. It's not because she's being neglected. It's not because she feels like she needs more in life or she feels like she deserves it. It's because she doesn't know the Lord. And because she doesn't know the Lord, she is not putting the Lord first in her life. She's going after what she wants. Because the sad thing is that some people who even claim to know the Lord they can let the Lord slip away. They can shut out the voice of the Lord enough to where they can help themselves to whatever they want in life and just and feel like for a moment, for a little bit of time, that's going to satisfy me. That's what I want. I'm going to go after that. But what does it end up being? Well, I think that the writer of Ecclesiastes said it best when he says it's soap bubbles. It's all is vanity. It's like grasping at the wind. You go after what you thought you wanted. Oh, it's going to be so wonderful, and it ends up being just emptiness. It ends up being heartbreak. It ends up being devastation. And why? Because we were created for better things than that. You weren't created for fornication. You weren't created for adultery. You weren't created for houses or money or land. You were created for God. And so the sooner we realize that no matter what we've done in life, and all of us are guilty, that's the problem, aren't we? When I'm talking about this stuff and we're like, oh man, oh geez. Jesus says looking at a woman in lust is adultery, and here I am and all these things, and I've committed so much in my heart, and I've done so much in my life, and I'm so guilty, and yet it doesn't matter where we've been or what we've done. Jesus forgives us, doesn't he? If we will simply turn to him. Look at Judah. This man so set apart for himself. And going after Canaanite women and watching how his life is just unraveling after selling his brother off. And no doubt he was thinking to himself, of course God is cursing me because I did that to my brother. And yet God would redeem his life. He would repent. And God would say, that's all I'm looking for. I'm looking for you to turn to me and just say, God, I'm sorry for the things I've done, the things I've acted on, the things that I've been thinking in my heart and meditating on. And I just want you to be, I want you to be the one in my life that I'm looking for, that I'm clinging to, that I'm hoping in. And not all of this. And so the first thing that Joseph says is he says, I can't do this thing to my master. He has been so good to me. How could I do this thing to him? He hasn't withheld anything from me except for you. But then he says, how could I do this great, notice how he describes it, great wickedness. Great wickedness. I mean, think about the things in this life that are great wickedness. I think that would be a good way for a newscast to start. Today we see much great wickedness in the land today as they show all the atrocities and things that are happening. This person was murdered. It's great wickedness. You don't call it that anymore, do they? It's just the news, just what happened today. Oh, what other juicy tidbit can I, consume my mind with? It's great wickedness. Against who? Against God. That's what he says. How could I do this great? How could God allow this to happen in my life? How could God allow me to be sold off? And now I'm here and I deserve this. He could have easily said that. I deserve this woman. I deserve this pleasure. I deserve something because God has been so bad to me. Or my brothers are so bad to me. Or nobody will ever know because I can just do this thing and I'm in a foreign place and my family's not here. It's not going to be, no shame's going to be brought upon me. But Joseph believed that he was created for a greater purpose than that. James chapter 1, verse 12 says, blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good and every perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, within whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. You see, the thing is we try to take what we think we want or what we think we deserve or what we think is best, and we take it as we are tempted and our lust is excited in us, and we say, I want that. I'm going to take it for myself. You remember that thing, that thing, my precious. Me wants it, Me's got to have it. We're overwhelmed by it, and we can't do anything but get it. And then when we get it, it destroys us. We start looking in the mirror, next thing you know, we're bald and we have big teeth and giant eyes, Gollum, sorry. But that's what sin does to us. It destroys us, and we think we want it, and we're drawn away, and temptation. See, temptation is not sin. Don't you realize Jesus was tempted in all ways, yet without sin, the Bible tells us? He was tempted. He's a high priest that sympathizes with our weaknesses because he was tempted just like we are, yet without sinning. Sometimes we make the mistake of thinking, oh man, I'm tempted by that. You've been there. You open up the fridge, double fudge sundae that your wife only ate half of, your husband or whoever in your house only ate half, and you're like, I could eat the rest of that. And he says that, you're tempted, but it brings forth sin. It gives birth to sin when you're drawn away by your own desires and enticed. God's not tempting you. But I want you to notice what James said there. He didn't say, stay away from temptation. You just got to live in misery the rest of your life and not get anything you want. No, he says, flee temptation, but every good and perfect gift, and I think we could insert there fulfilling, satisfying gift, comes down from the Father of lights, within whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. There's no regret. Isn't that the worst thing about it? That's the worst thing about sin, is we go and we sin, and then afterwards we're like, another mark against me. Another scar on my reputation, another failure in my life. And now here I am just living out just regret after regret, and I might as well just give into it because I have so many as it is. And yet he says you don't have to give into that temptation, into that desire. What you have to give into is Jesus. And every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father of lights, in whom there is no scar, no shadow, no dark spot. You're never going to regret the time we spend with Jesus. You're never going to regret that time where in His presence is fullness of joy and you feel the overwhelming flood of His love in your life. And yet when we go away and we try to hide in the dark and we do our little sins and we think we're getting away with them, it's leaving a dark spot on our soul. And we know that because when we go out into the light, we're just not quite ready to open our eyes to the brightness of it. Because we are so used to being in the dark. And that's a place of misery in our lives. How do we get out into the light? We repent and we say, Jesus, forgive me. We call our sin sin, and we say, help me to follow you, Jesus. Give me a desire for you, Lord. Bring me out of this muck and out of this mire. And you realize that He is able to lift us from the mire and set our feet upon the rock. It doesn't matter what we've done. He says, I'm going to be with you even to the end of the age. You might as well enjoy your time with Him, right? And not try to live in the dirt. Because He loves you and He desires good things for you. And Joseph was a guy who understood that somehow, this young kid. 18 years old. We can't say, oh man, you don't understand my temptation. Can you imagine his temptation? And how easy it would have been for him just to do the wrong thing at this moment? Lie with me, Joseph. How could I do this? Just came in to do my work. It wasn't... Yeah. And so, verse 10, it was as she spoke to Joseph, notice this, day by day, he did not heed her to lie with her or to be with her. Joseph, come in the other room. Joseph, hey Joseph, you're a good-looking guy. I really like you. And he's day by day by day by day. hearing the temptation coming after her. But it happened, verse 11, about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside. So he's all alone. This one moment he gets alone, and there she is, and she's in the house, and she sees him coming. That she caught him by his garment, verse 12 there, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. Have you ever been in this situation where you're just like, I got to get out of here now? I mean, he knew, I am no match for this temptation. Remember, no temptation is overtaken man. That's not common to man, but God will give you a way of escape. And sometimes that way of escape is just to run away. Not to try to stand in the face of temptation. Yeah, it's cowardly to flee from a fight, but it's not cowardly to flee from temptation. It takes bravery to flee from temptation, does it not? It takes a strong sense of, I know I need to be out of here. I felt this way one time. I remember I was actually in Denny's, been witnessing to some girls that were in the booth next to us. They were talking, they were asking us why we were reading the scriptures, me and my friend Brian. So I was witnessing to them and telling them about Jesus, and they were very receptive. It was very cool. Well, it's time for Brian to go, and so I thought, it's probably better for me to go too. And so I started to leave and made a pit stop, and on my way back out of the pit stop, I looked across the room at this beautiful woman. And I dated her before, and she was fantastic. And I thought to myself, I need to get out of this place before she sees me, because she's not a believer, and I now am a believer. And if she sees me, I will be overcome by temptation. And so I honestly thought of this. I thought of Joseph in Potiphar's house. Just run before she sees you. Because I don't want to get called over and her to flash her beautiful big eyes at me and be like, okay, I'll go on one date with you, or, whatever. I was enamored, And yet I'd already told her, I'm not gonna date you. She isn't a believer. I wasn't going to date her. Anyway, so I'm on my way out of Denny's. On my way. Robe still on, thank God. And I look across, and her cousin sees me, knowing me. She's like, hey, there's Mike. And then the beautiful woman turns around. She sees me too. She's like, come here. Everything I feared. And I thought to myself, so I resolved something else in that moment. I could have just snuffed her and left, but I thought, you know what? I'm just going to share the gospel with her. Because that's a good way to kill. That's a good buzzkill for any, temptation, right? I'm just going to share the gospel with her. And so I went over to the table and I sat down with her and I said, how you doing? She's like, I'm doing good. And actually she started the conversation. Are you like a Christian, like the born-again type? That's what she asked me. And I said, yeah, I am. And I started telling her about Jesus. And what was amazing to me is that she was very receptive to my words about Jesus. And she's like, I've been talking to this friend, and he's been telling me all this stuff, and I don't understand any of it. And so I explained the gospel to her, and she's like, I get it. I finally get it. Anyway, I ended up marrying that gal. My first wife. So my last wife, too. I mean, she's my only wife. But that's the thing. Joseph sees this opportunity, this place where he's in trouble. He knows, I am in trouble. She is a militant adulteress, and she is going to take me by force. And this 18-year-old kid who could have just said, you know what, I deserve this, he runs away, leaving her cloak in his hands. He doesn't even go back for it. He's not even going to test it. He's not even going to be, test it, just going to get out of there. And so he runs away. And it says, verse 13, and so it was, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, and she fled outside, and fled outside, that she called to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, see, he, her husband, this is who she's bad-mouthing here, and this kind of shows you the character of this woman. He has brought in to us a Hebrew to mock us. And he came into me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And so she having that she's enraged. She's been rejected for the last time. And so she calls for the men out. She has the evidence in her hand. This Hebrew came in to mock me. He tried to rape me, and so I cried out. And look, his cloak. He tried to rape me. And it happened when he heard that, that I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled and went outside. So she kept his garment with her until her master came home. Jason talked about this on Sunday, and I think it was kind of an interesting moment. You think about Joseph there, and here she is with his cloak. And at any moment, as Jason mentioned, he probably could have gone back in and said, okay, fine, don't tell the master. I'll lie with you. Call off the dogs. And yet, he waited for the master to call him home. She waited there with her garment next to her, waiting for her husband. Then she spoke to him with the words like these, saying, the Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came in to me to mock me. Verse 18, so it happened, as I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled outside. So it was that when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him after this manner, that his anger was aroused. Who was he angry at? Not Joseph. Not Joseph. He knew. He knew his wife. He knew who she was. He knew what she was about. Think about this. This guy is what? The chief executioner, right? He's the one who was responsible for putting people to death who had committed crimes against the state, crimes worthy of death. And if there was a crime that was worthy of death, it would be to sleep with this chief executioner's wife. Think about it. I know, being the pastor, that if somebody were to try to take advantage of my wife, I would want to kill them. Right? And so here's a man, his anger is aroused. Notice, then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the prison. Joseph's master took him and put him in maximum security where all the worst criminals are. No. He put him where the king's prisoners are confined. He doesn't put him in the general population with the horrible people, but he puts him in the federal prison, if you will. Notice this. It says, but the Lord, again, was with Joseph, verse 21, and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did, it was his doing. So Joseph, now put in prison, is now put in charge of the prison. The Lord's favor was with him. Now, it's hard to say if Potiphar put him in this position, but whatever the case is, Joseph showed that God's favor was upon him, and so now the keeper of the prison is putting everything in his hands. Verse 23, the keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made him to prosper. Now you think about Joseph, and you think about his life up to this point. And he's been thrown into a pit by his brothers, sold by his brothers, taken down to Egypt, sold on the auction block, made a slave, accused of rape, or attempted rape, and thrown into prison. And you would think, by this time, now Joseph is going to be mad at God. Now Joseph is going to say, you know what, God, I have done everything I'm supposed to do to be a good child of yours, and all these bad things keep happening to me. And think about that in terms of our own lives. I have belly ached over the smallest trials in my life. It's shameful. I have complained. I have questioned God. God, why would you allow my tire to go flat? I'm late for an appointment, stuff like that. Really? Kind of puts things in perspective when you look at Joseph rotting in prison, a guy who used to be the favored kid in his father's house, and now he's a prisoner, the head of the prison. Oh, that's great. Hey, my son's a model prisoner, that's what his mom would have on the bumper sticker, right? My son's a model prisoner, Look, he's risen all the way to the top of the prison. He's top of his class in the prison. Not much to brag about, right? And yet here he is. That's interesting. Well, we'll stop there because I'm not going to get through chapter 40, but I just want you to notice this. Just the beginning here. Notice it says, it came to pass after these things that the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt offended the Lord, the king of the king. So the candlestick maker was the only one that got away. But Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief butler and the chief baker, so he put them to custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison, in the place where Joseph was confined. Okay, wait, so he put them in the custody of the captain of the guard. Who's the captain of the guard? Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him. And so this captain of the guard, Potiphar, has the chief butler and chief baker put in his authority. Somebody's going to get hung. Somebody caused the Pharaoh to get sick. That's why they take the chief butler and chief baker, because they're the ones who taste the food before the Pharaoh eats it. The chief butler drink the wine before the Pharaoh eats it. The chief butler would eat the food. And somehow this food got to Pharaoh and he got really sick. And so those two guys, one of them, they're responsible. And so they're put into prison until they find out. They get to the bottom of who tried to poison me. And they're put in the custody of the captain of the guard, Potiphar, who puts them into the hands of who? None other than his former slave, Joseph. Now we see why Potiphar was probably not angry at Joseph. He's probably angry because I just lost my best slave and I have to save faith now to put this poor guy in prison because my wife is a scoundrel or scoundress or whatever you'd call a woman, scoundrel. Anyway, pretty amazing. We'll get into chapter 40 next time.